Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and a tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and a video review series. Take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, I'll be reviewing the 5e Adventure Bundle Monster Manual Expanded Adventures, designed by Dan Kahn, Daniel Floberg, and NevernotDM for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This review has been sponsored by the publisher, and a review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you are interested in a sponsored review, you can reach out to me via email or Discord or on my submission form at roguewatson.com. And if you enjoy the content, consider using my affiliate links for online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. I have actually reviewed a number of this style of book, which is a dungeon anthology mini adventure layer book based on a monster book. Most notably, Kobold Press has been doing this since their very first Tome of Beasts, I believe, where they had the Book of Layers, and then Tome of Beasts 2, and then I don't know what they called the other ones, if they still called it Book of Layers or just called it something else. But anyway, and essentially the layer books would be a bunch of, we're going to use the terminology loosely here, adventure. I like calling it a layer versus an adventure because if it just takes place in a single dungeon and doesn't involve any other locales, I think layer is a little better of a terminology than calling it an adventure, which isn't to say I don't want to badmouth these as like they're not full adventures, but they are dungeon crawls. That's what you're getting. And in like Kobold Presses, for example, they were showcasing monsters from their books and often had like just the one monster would be there and it would be that creature's lair. And then they may have one or two new monsters and others would just be from standard, monster manual books. What has happened here is that the designers have created some really cool bespoke dungeons and featured an astonishingly large number of monsters from specifically Monster Manual Expanded 3, which I reviewed in, uh, 2021 is the date apparently that I reviewed at. What is time? But I remember it was an amazing book. Really, the whole series is incredible, right? Monster Manual Expanded took all the base stat blocks from the Monster Manual and just created different like offshoots and variants from all of those creatures. So it really helps you, fix the metagaming that players can do or the familiarity you get with all the basic creatures we've seen over and over again if you've got some experience playing 5e. And there's 3 different versions of this. They have incredible art. Like, they're just amazing product. You can go look at my review. I think I reviewed the original one, and then the third one was the most recent one. This product takes, like I said, with those layers, it creates 5 dungeon crawling adventures, dungeon crawls, that are fully stocked, fully laid out. We get maps and everything, and they feature monsters from Monster Manual Expanded 3. You do not need to own Monster Manual Expanded 3 in order to play these adventures because all of the stat blocks you need are actually included here, which is over 30 of them, by the way. I don't know what percentage of that is actually from the original monster book, but that is crazy. And in fact, I don't think I saw a single creature that wasn't from Monster Manual Expanded 3, which is also very impressive, because typically when I've seen these layer books, they're just stocked with some basic things to fill up the gaps, but like, oh, we just need regular goblins or kobolds that are guarding this new fancy dragon or whatever. But I think it lends itself to just how good Monster Manual Expanded is. The fact that you can use different variants of creatures means that the designers don't have to rely on any of those basic stat blocks. So we get all these, instead, these new creatures that we can use. Since there's only 5 here, only 5, this is still a very meaty book. It's, how many pages is it? 70 pages. I can go over each one individually and actually look at the adventures, and you can see how friggin' sexy they are. Now, the level range is one of the few disappointments I have with this adventure book, because even though there are 5 of them, all 5 of them are basically the same level range. Now, that's the bad news to me, even though if you put a gun to my head and said, what's the best levels to play D&D with, I would say, why are you asking me that? You can put the gun down. But I would then answer like, well, it's tier 2, clearly. Level 5 through 10 is where everything kind of fits into place. Players are stronger, but they're still vulnerable to a lot of enemies. They're starting to get more powerful spells, but not ones that just straight up break the game, although a lot of those are still kind of earlier on. Anyway, I could rant about this for a while, and eventually the person would lose the gun and hopefully leave. But my complaint is that they're all that same level range. I would have liked to see a little bit more variety. But the good news is all of the individual encounters within these layers have level scaling, which is very nice to see. So they actually can be an entire tier 2 and scale from like, hey, if your players are level 5, then you'll fight this enemy at this many hit points and maybe this reduced stat block. And if you have a level 9 party, then suddenly the enemy has their full stat block and maybe double the hit points or something. That's a really fun way to do encounter scaling. And it's tricky because the designers clearly didn't want to substitute creatures because, again, the whole thesis behind this book is to use those new monsters. So you don't want to like just, replace really powerful monsters with not so powerful. So it was an interesting exercise in like, well, how do you do encounter scaling while still wanting to use those exact creatures? And I think they actually did a pretty good job of that for the most part. All right, so this first adventure is the Archives of Hazan-Abdul. This is a desert dungeon crawl with, it's got a backstory about a sultan transformed into a dragon, but none of that is really context you necessarily need to know. And that's kind of a running theme with a lot of these adventures. I mean, they're just dungeon crawls. Dungeon crawls can still be very fun and have their own storylines and stuff, but I don't think any of them particularly had huge big story hooks, save for, probably my two favorite ones, which we'll get into. This was not one of them, but I think it's still a very well designed dungeon crawl. It feels like a very classic, like, death trap dungeon. It's a very Zelda-esque dungeon, which I don't have any problem with. One of the things I always talk about is that balancing act of a dungeon, where you don't want to create a linear dungeon. You want your players to be able to explore the space and find different paths and maybe do things in their own order, but at the same time, you don't want to trigger the final room, the boss room, too early in the dungeon. It just feels like the whole pacing gets screwed up. So how do you solve that problem? Well, if you look at every Zelda dungeon, at least classic Zelda games, you find the dungeon door and then you have to go find the key, and that key then causes you to have to go through, a good chunk of the rest of the dungeon. This is literally like you get to the like foyer and the final door with the dragon on the other side is locked with 3 keys. So you got to go around the dungeon and get those 3 keys. There's actually 4 keys available and there's 4 rooms, and each room has some kind of challenge in it. There's a no warband in one of them. There's this Naga creature in another. There's a really cool trap between A3 and A4 here, where when half the party enters A4, which you read like this cryptic puzzle thing, and then that splits the party, and then half of them, and the door slams shut. Half of them have to deal with this ooze parallel thing, this muddy ooze thing that drops from the ceiling with a key inside, and the others have to deal with a classic like sand filling up the room, and they got to be able to push the buttons in the right order to turn the sand off. It feels inspired from, a Serac and Tomb of Horrors and that kind of death trap thing. And then the final dungeon is a really cool showcase for the sand dragon, because there's sand pits everywhere. So your dragon, and as a legendary action, the sand dragon can disengage and pop in and out of the sand. And basically it's just a really good excuse to show that creature off. So that's fantastic. It's a good dungeon. Notice how there's basically a monster in every single one of these rooms, though. Even the crypts, of course, have a bunch of bad skeleton things that pop out of it, or mummies. Actually, you know what? That's okay. We found it. There was one case. I just realized skeletons and mummies. There's one case where it uses just regular damn creatures and not special creatures. That was like the one room in the one adventure that actually uses non-Monster Manual expanded creatures. Anyway, you are going to find that these dungeons are pretty monster heavy. I'm not including that as a con necessarily, and I think most of them still have a decent balance, but I think I'm not including that as a con because that is part of the thesis of this entire, like, the goal of this book is to show off the monsters. It's a Monster Manual, it's the adventure companion to Monster Manual Expanded, so obviously you're going to find monsters here. Now, I don't think that should ever be to the detriment of a good dungeon crawl where you can have a breather in between and have some puzzles and exploration and some chance to chat with somebody in the dungeon. This one, though, is probably the worst example of that because literally I think there is just a monster in every single room except for the sand trap room. So like 6 out of 7 rooms, there's a monster to defeat. Well, maybe not the first foyer room, actually, now I think about it. Which still, that's kind of brutal in a lot of ways. All right, then we get to one of my favorites, the Feast of Flesh. This one fits really well with something like Ravenloft. And in fact, I believe it's even supposed to be set in, story takes place in a village in Ravenloft. The players are, by the way, all of these have different adventure hooks. So multiple adventure hooks for every single adventure. They all make sense. They're all pretty intriguing. A lot of people kind of hand wave adventure hooks, especially with the dungeon crawl where it's like, look, we just want the players to get to the entrance of this dungeon. I don't care about anything else. But these designers really did. They cared about how, for the most part, they cared about how you get to each of these locations and how that sets up like the goals going forward. Some of them might be to find an item. Some of them might be to just defeat the foe inside, just the kill all enemies thing. In this case, the good adventure hook to me is that you're hired, if you want to put it in a Curse of Strahd, from the village of Kresk, and you have to escort a noble to another town where it's a church, and they're holding a banquet to kind of bless this noble, and then he's there with his wife, I think, and then a retinue of guards, and you are, just extra protection to help out against the monsters in there. So you fight this one monster battle against these Tigbanwas, which are really cool looking, creepy creatures. And you think, okay, we've done our good job. Now we get to kind of come in here and chat for a break. But of course, as the DM keeps telling you, no, you're in here, you're sitting down for your meal, I think the player's going to start realizing, well, why are we actually like going through the motions of this? And you're not just montaging us being in town and taking a rest here at this church. Well, it's because shit's about to go down. And in this case, it's a horror movie. You come in, the food is going to be served, but it's all poisoned. And all of the clergy and the priests are all monsters. They're all these fiends, these busos, these holomas, these kubats, these really creepy looking, like eating fiend monsters that can shapeshift into these terrible, terrible creatures. And absolutely amazing the way it plays out with the I forget, the noble and the wife each get separated to go in different areas. So they're blessed separately, are going to do other tasks. And then you are at the dinner scene and you're eating. And of course, half the guards die from the poison. And then all the clergy transform and you got to fight them. And then you hear a scream upstairs. You run up there. You got to save her from the Kubat. But then there's this cool shadow stairs trap, which can grab you as you're trying to run up there, and she can jump on and try to attack, and then you go down and fight the dude, and he's turned into this Halama thing, and it all just, I guess if it were a longer adventure, it would have done this little nice roller coaster of tension. Instead, it goes click, 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 and then once it hits, you're just, woo! Your roller coaster ride is going all the way down at breakneck speed, but still a fun way to do horror for level 5 through 10 for sure, and it fits very well with Curse of Strahd, or just any time you want to do like a horror-themed adventure, because you could just slot it anywhere. You just bring in somebody from one location to another, and it just turns out the location you're bringing to that you thought was safe is actually just has been completely transformed and overrun by fiends. So I really like this adventure, and it shows off these very creepy-ass creatures, so very cool. That's Feast of Flesh. Meltdown in the Mire is a really fun idea, where it is a Fey-run factory which is producing cheap magic items, and they are polluting the local swamp. It's like a Captain Planet plotline or something. What's interesting here also is usually the Fey are not associated with the technology part of it. It's usually the Fey is the nature part of it, and it's usually humanity that's doing the technology asshole thing. So that was kind of an interesting twist there. And their pollution is leaking into the swamp and creating all kinds of problems. This is the adventure hook for a lot of players to get involved in just various issues of the swamp life being transformed or mutated or poisoning different villages and things. And they go to investigate this, off the grid magical workshop. It's kind of a little bit of a heist, but it's a very small workshop. There's not a whole lot going on. All these dungeon crawls are, maybe around the same number of areas, like 7 or 8 areas or so, which is it's still a good sized little dungeon crawl, but don't expect these huge, vast, this isn't, I guess to give an example, the last time I did a factory, it would have been the Dwerger Fortress in, I don't even want to spoil what campaign that is, because it might be a little bit of a spoiler for folks. But anyway, that's what reminded me of when I thought factory. This one creates these cheap magic items, which literally are unstable. They have a chance of exploding. You can infiltrate this place from several different locations, but you all kind of end up in the same place regardless. And you deal with some hobgoblin, iron shadows, and assassins. There's these. There is one bullywug you can chat with. It's the bullywugs, which are the local people getting just destroyed from the pollution. And he actually, hated his tribe. They all made fun of him for his scientific brainness. And but you can convince him, like, hey man, all this stuff you're doing is really just destroying your homeland, and you should probably not do it. So I give points for getting the ability to do a social encounter there in front of all the other battles. There's a chance to like overload the cauldrons and things and cause a huge meltdown. I like the boss battle, which involves battling against this director character who's just a unique kind of I don't know, hobgoblin type creature with spellcasting. But he's got all these magic items that make him powerful, and then all his magic items are, of course, the cheap shit that he makes as a chance to explode. And if it does explode, which of course I would script that to happen, then it awakens the Thessal Hydra, which is the real cool creature that you see here, that has been killed and stuffed and mounted in his office as a kind of Chekhov's monster, I guess, when you see this creature for the first time. And of course, it awakens and becomes like the real fight. So that was a pretty nifty little boss fight there. This is the one probably that I would have looked at and be like, oh, I wish this area was like twice as big and a little more interesting with like the heist maneuver. Just the idea of having a classic like factory polluting the area and you got to go in there and stop it and be eco warriors or whatever. And it turns out, of course, they're corrupt and producing like cheap goods and all this. I like that concept a lot, but it's just over. It's over a little too quickly for me, but still a really neat idea. Rotten at the Root has by far the least amount of story involved. There's no real people to talk to or any story to learn. It's just there's this cursed gem that found its way into some plant life, and now the plant life itself is taking over in a jungle and recreating a temple out of plants. So of course it's going to be a plant themed dungeon. And then there's a lot of plant creatures in Monster Manual Expanded 3. This uses a lot of them. This wolf in sheep's clothing is especially an interesting creature. It's like a tree stump that can manifest like illusions on top. So it acts like there's just people chilling there, but they're actually monsters trying to get you to come in close. The only real puzzle is you're supposed to reflect some lights while monsters are spawning. This one also has a lot of monsters in it and only has the 5 rooms and is very linear too. It's just room. But it has a cool boss battle against a monstrous corpse flower. So I would have liked to have a little bit more interesting things to go on here. Just a little more story, I think. But a really cool looking dungeon design. By the way, dungeon art by Dungeon A, which I will link to the Patreon in the written review. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to be backing their Patreon because this is some gorgeous, gorgeous map art I absolutely adore and obviously elevates this entire product. But also, this product gets to use the art for Monster Manual Expanded 3, which had amazing artwork for all its monsters. Like, that is like starting on third base here when it comes to your just overall presentation and layout. Like, it's practically cheating, but I mean, the fact that you can combine that with amazing map art is just a super thumbs up. 10 strokes till midnight. When I first saw this map, I did a double take and thought, I've seen this adventure before. And it turns out I have, or I at least seen the map before. Turns out I have not seen this exact map before, but I have reviewed another encounter book that had a clockwork style map that literally had 12 like room quadrants in a circle. And it took me an embarrassing long time to remember where I saw it from. I had to go through my archives. It's from the Adventures of the Pot-Bellied Kobold. There's a clockwork dungeon in there. It is not the same art as this one. And obviously it's not the same adventure, but it's really funny that two different designers had kind of a similar concept. But at that point, all similarities end. This one is a laboratory where a bunch of mad scientists were building a clockwork beholder. Why the fuck were they building a clockwork beholder? I don't know. It seems super dangerous, and of course it was super dangerous. It ran amok and killed everybody except for the one head honcho who may be hiring you to go in there and recover some stuff under disguise, which is kind of a fun little adventure hook that I would definitely be using. And the way it works, unlike the other one, Adventure of Pot-Bellied Kobold, you had to worry about like the clock ticking and all these other things. This one is more of a traditional dungeon crawl, and fortunately also creates a very linear crawl where you're going through each outer facing each room at a time. But because the actual mechanism is broken and you can't make it to the inner part until, of course, you get to all the way over and experience all the rooms. So that's one way that you stop your players, or you get your players to the climax at the very end. Although, again, I would have liked a little bit more exploration on the player's point of view. Maybe just open up some of these rooms and let them kind of mix and match out of order. I don't think that would have changed things too much. Though, as soon as you make it to the middle, I guess that triggers the actual clockwork boss fight. But the idea is they're building each of the beholders' eye rays in each one of these rooms. So there's like a fire room and a lightning room and a death room and an anti-magic room. I guess anti-magic, was that a ray or is that just his eyeball? I forget how that works. But they all have some kind of cool, thing in there. There's a lot of exploration, but I mean, just the players can be looking at things and seeing the destruction that was wrought and reading like journals, and that I like all of that quite a bit. This one also has my favorite social encounter out of all of them, which is the Wraith. That is the literal ghost in the machine, where it's one of the killed scientists has been manifested as a Wraith shadow priest, and he wants revenge on the other, the lead scientist guy that kind of condemned them all, as well as just he'll help the players defeat the clockwork Beholder also, if they decide to side with him, and he will appear in I think it's through layer actions to the final battle, and then he'll also be there as a little, he'll like possess an object while they're going through the rest of the dungeon. So I thought that was a really cool twist to use what would be like a badass monster to fight just actually as a social encounter. I think that's always really intriguing for players to deal with creatures in that way. One of my favorite jokes also is in this adventure, where in the beginning they make it to this decontamination lab, which sprays, of course, noxious acid at them, or a gas. And if they break through stuff, then a little PA system comes on and says, "You will be dealt with through extreme prejudice." And what that does is it activates a clockwork golem, which is this badass motherfucker, in the far end of the dungeon, named Extreme Prejudice. And the Extreme Prejudice will make its way all the way to the players, getting to them about halfway through the dungeon. I love that joke so much, and I would absolutely have it have a like a "my name is," kind of a thing, and have Extreme Prejudice written on it, but like somebody spray painted it in a joke wax. It would just be, I don't know, it's a really fun joke, and it works well because you juxtapose it with a completely badass, like RoboCop looking War Machine, just killer creature that's incredible. In fact, I remember when I reviewed Monster Manual Expanded 3, I specifically called out the Clockwork Golem and the Clockwork Beholder as two exceptionally cool creatures from that book. So this one, the fact that it uses both of them, is a super thumbs up. Here's a good example of the encounter scaling, by the way. I've been on this page for a little bit. Two different encounter scalings for a dungeon crawl that can go from average party level of 6 all the way up to 12, which is a giant range. And in this case, you fight the golem with only 120 hit points. What does the base golem have? Let's see. By the way, it includes all the stat blocks. 168 is normally what it has. So 120 hit points. That's like a 50% reduction or something. Or at APL 8, you just fight the golem as normal with its same hit points. At level 9 through 10, you fight the golem with 240 hit points, and all of a sudden you're jacking the hit points up by like 50%. And then at 11 through 12, you fight the golem with 240 hit points, and when it takes the multi-attack action, it can use one of its other attacks, Arcane Cannon or Steam Spray, as a bonus action. So this is an interesting test to the designers, and I think they did a very good job of, because normally when I see encounter scaling, it's, hey, just replace this creature with this weaker creature, or replace this creature with a stronger creature, or just include these other creatures. But in this case, the designers were like, well, we really want to use these monsters. That's kind of the whole point behind these dungeons. So how can we use encounter scaling to still use these monsters? In this case, it uses them with different hit points, or gives them different attacks, or maybe fewer resistances, or reduced stats, or whatever it does. And I think that's actually really clever, and a good way of, also just a cool way of telling DMs like, hey, you can use the monsters, just don't be afraid to mess with the stat blocks in order to make these fights either more or less challenging. And it's like that, I believe, for every single encounter that's here. So just super thumbs up on all of that. I do believe I'm not going to rank them all, but 10 Strokes Till Midnight, I don't know if I like that one the best or Feast of Flesh the best. 10 Strokes of Midnight is definitely the biggest one, and I really appreciate the exploration angle. Even though it's so linear. I wish it wasn't so linear, I guess, is the bummer. And I do love Feast of Flesh because of the story it tells. And when things hit when you get to that climax in the horror movie, it's just all pure action after that, while still being pretty horrifying. So they're just both very, very top tier. But there is not a bad adventure in the bunch. Now, adventure, we're just talking dungeon crawl, so dungeon crawling adventure, layer, whatever you want to call it. So they're smaller, but gosh, they are really, really damn good and so well designed. And again, just using the monsters from Monster Manual Expanded 3, you're already starting at third base, but still very excellent job. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for Monster Manual Expanded Adventures. Pro: 5 well-designed, monster-heavy dungeon crawls. I am not saying monster-heavy in a bad way, because I think that's the point. That's the point of this, is to use those monsters. Because they're smaller dungeons and they want to use as many monsters as possible, they then become monster heavy, which is probably why I liked the clock one so much, is because it's a larger dungeon. It feels like you've got more rooms in between the constant battling. So I'm not including that as a con, whereas normally I may have actually even said like, gosh, these don't do a good job of balancing the exploration, combat, and socialization that we enjoy from all those different pillars of D&D. But if you like your monsters and fighting interesting monsters, And this showcases some very interesting monsters, and I think you're going to be satisfied. Pro, over 30 stat blocks and all their artwork, I think, for Monster Manual Expanded 3. I know there's over 30 stat blocks. I don't know if each one of them has artwork included here. I think it does. I was trying to remember of a time where I was like, wait, what does that creature look like? But I think they're all in here. I guess they don't have the director specifically from this one, but otherwise I think they've got all the giant artwork, and I mean it looks incredible, and all the stat blocks. So, which I mean, that should be requirements, and it basically is if you're using a book and you don't have access to that thing. But I think it's still a pro, and it's worth pointing out the fact that you get it from what is not from, you know, your typical Monster Manual everybody has. It's from this extra book that's on the DM's Guild, but this includes all those stat blocks, and they are so good. And pro, encounter scaling for every encounter and multiple adventure hooks for each adventure, which is awesome. So I've come to expect this from this design team. It's very well produced, well organized in terms of adventure summary, and then here's all the different hooks that can get your players to this particular location, and then the encounter scaling is just a phenomenal test in how to use those monsters while still having them be for such a wide level range. And pro, each adventure includes a full color map of the dungeon with some amazing dungeon art. I assume these are included. I didn't get this from the DM's Guild. I got it from directly, so I didn't get any kind of separate image files. I'm going to go ahead and presume that we probably get those included, because I think the designer has always done that with his products. In terms of getting like player versions and gridded and non-gridded and all that. But this art is fantastic. It really just elevates the entire product and makes me want to run all of these dungeons. My only con is that all the adventures are tier 2. I love the encounter scaling. The encounter scaling works very, very well. So the fact that you can have it be from like 5 to 10 or 5 to 12, whatever, is awesome. Super thumbs up to that. But I still would have loved to see the designers tackle some of the smaller creatures from Monster Manual Expanded 3, or some of the bigger creatures, and have a little bit of a wider level range. It feels a little too limited having them all be with the same 5 to 10 range. Because I mean, if we're all leveling at the same pace, then I guess you would barely be able to include all of these in a single campaign, and then we don't have any time for your regular campaign. You know, like, I think most of us are going to pick and choose like the individual ones. All right, final verdict. Featuring over 30 monsters from Monster Manual Expanded 3, along with clever dungeon designs, Monster Manual Expanded Adventures is the perfect dungeon-ready complement to the best monster book series on the DM's Guild. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel, and support my work at patreon.com/Rogue Watson. Shouts to Platinum patrons: Joe, Will, Thomas, Stan, Brandon, Xenocider, Eclectic, Roleplay Roll, Christopher, Corey, Big Nut, John F, John L, Scott, Eric, Tyler, Nathan, Cap Crystal Lake, Counselor, Andrew, Daryl the Relder, and Captain Woody 79, Stephanie, Andy, Patrick, Jason, Ismail, Ahmet, Lumpy Spuds, and Gold patrons: RPG, Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Does the Lion, Sam, Jerome, Nathan, Fast Tortoise, Scott, Rufus, Carolyn, Jerry, Thomas, and Glenn. Thank you all very much for your support.